You can start a YouTube channel with the cheapest camera that you can find at your local camera store. Yeah, you heard me right. You see this? This camera that I'm recording on is a $3,000 camera body and a $500 lens. This is the camera and lens that I film most of my YouTube videos with. And guess what? It is complete overkill. You literally would not be able to tell the difference if I was filming with this, my Fujifilm X-H2S, or if I was filming with this, my Fujifilm X-T200. I bought this camera with this lens on sale for 649 Canadian dollars a few years ago. See the price difference? So why did I spend all the money on this fancy camera and this fancy lens? Well, that's a topic for another video. But for this video, I'm gonna show you how you can use a cheaper camera to still film amazing YouTube videos that are more than good enough quality to get you down the path of being a creative entrepreneur or YouTuber. So obviously, first things first, you're gonna need a camera. And if you don't have one, I know it seems intimidating, don't worry, I'm gonna give you some entry-level suggestions from all the major manufacturers. So obviously, this camera that I've been showing on the screen is my camera. It's a Fujifilm X-T200. It's kind of their most entry-level mirrorless camera, but I'm kind of getting the feeling that it's discontinued or really hard to get in stock. So you probably wanna look at one of the other manufacturers. And don't get too hung up over manufacturers. You're pretty much gonna get the exact same specs from the entry-level mirrorless cameras and kit lenses from all the big brands. From Canon, you're looking at, I think it's called the Canon M50. That camera is about $799 US with a kit lens or $999 Canadian equivalent. From Sony, you have two options. You have one with an interchangeable lens, you know, a lens that you can take on and off and change with different focal lengths. That one's called the ZV-E10, I believe, or the ZV-1, which is a fixed lens that just zooms in and out, but it's stuck to the camera. And yeah, both those cameras are about $999 Canadian with a kit lens for the ZV-E10, or like $799 US. You see the theme here, they're all kind of the same price and they get you pretty much the same specs. And there's one more option from Nikon, it's called the Z30. All great cameras, all can pretty much film 4K, 30 FPS. Great cameras, perfect for YouTube. So yeah, pick one of those. If you want to buy one and support the channel, I've put affiliate links to all of them in the description of this video. Okay, so once you've gotten your camera, you're ready to start filming, you need to get your settings all set up. And the beauty with YouTube videos, especially if you're doing this type of video, you know, a talking head video, more or less in same lighting environment every video, your settings are probably gonna rarely change, as long as your environment doesn't change. So now I'm gonna actually show you how to set up a lot of these settings by showing you my camera on the screen, but I'm not gonna go into too much detail about the why behind all these settings. You're probably looking at your camera, you see all these manual modes, it looks intimidating. Don't worry, it's not that big a deal. I'll go into it in a different video, but right now I'm just gonna tell you the settings you wanna set so you can get going as quickly as possible and start filming your videos. So the first thing we're gonna start with is resolution. Now, assuming you got one of these cameras, I think all of them can film up to 4K 30p. So 4K is the resolution, like the actual number of pixels that make up the frame, and 30p is the number of frames that the camera is kind of flicking through per second. So 4K 30 is where I would recommend you film everything if you can. YouTube supports 4K. People filter videos by 4K, it's the best resolution. I would just go with 4K to keep things simple. If you don't, for, you know, maybe you don't have a big enough memory card, you can do 1080p, 30 FPS. Same thing, no one's gonna notice, both are fine. Next thing you wanna set after you've set your camera's video resolution is your shutter speed. It's usually gonna be shown by like a little SS symbol, and it's represented in fractions, like 1/4, 1/2, you know, 1/100th, and that's a fraction of a second. Like that's what that's measuring. So a really quick rule that you want to write down for video, especially when you're shooting with manual settings, is your shutter speed should always be double what your frame rate is. So if you've set your camera to 30p, 30 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 60. If you've set your camera to 24p, 24 frames per second, you should be at 48 if your camera has. Otherwise, just do the closest shutter speed to that number, which would be 50. And what this does is it just makes sure that your video gets like a nice natural looking motion blur. Like you can see as I'm moving my hand through the frame, it doesn't look like super choppy because we don't have a million frames being picked up. It looks natural, similar to what you'd get with your human eyes, and it's just pleasing for people to watch. So that's a rule, write it down. Shutter speed, double your frame rate. So now you've set up your resolution, you've set up your frame rate, and you've set up your shutter speed. The next thing you want to work on is your aperture. Basically what aperture is similar to your pupil. It's how wide open or closed your lens will be. It basically influences how much light can get in through the lens and also how much is in focus. On your camera, your aperture is going to be represented by what's called an F number. So you'll see a little squiggly F and a number after it. That number is your aperture setting. And it's a little counterintuitive, but the smaller that F number is, the smaller that aperture number is, actually means that the lens opening's bigger. So a smaller aperture means bigger opening. The higher the number, the smaller the opening. So the higher you set your aperture number, the less light will get in and the harder it'll be to properly expose whatever you're shooting. You'll need more lights and you might have to bump up other settings. So for the purposes of this video, I always recommend set your aperture to the widest aperture or the smallest F number that your camera and lens can accommodate. So the next and probably one of the final settings that you're gonna need to set on your camera before you're ready to go and start filming is your ISO. Your ISO is a number represented in hundreds or thousands, which basically represents your camera's sensor, its sensitivity to light. So in a perfect world, you always want to try to keep your ISO at the lowest possible number that your camera can accommodate. Without getting too technical here, basically the higher you raise your ISO, the more kind of artifacts or fragments, noise or fuzz will pick up in your image, the more grainy it'll get. So if you want to keep image looking as high quality as possible, try to keep your ISO as low as possible. Now, that might not always be possible depending on how much light you have and where you're shooting. So basically, once you've set all the other settings up until this point, set your ISO as low as possible as a starting point and kind of play with it and work your way up until you're happy with how bright the image is. So now that you're done all that and you're looking at the screen and kind of looking at yourself staring back at you, you should probably be seeing a pretty well exposed image looking back at you, and that's great. You're almost ready to start shooting. There's just one more tip I have to give you just to dial everything in so your videos look super clean and pro. The last quick setting you want to tweak has to do with your camera's autofocus. So as you can see, I'm here. If I put my hand here, it'll hopefully change focus or things will be in and out of focus. Autofocus. So right now, this camera that I'm shooting on is set to lock on to my eyes. So if I move around, hopefully if the camera's doing a good job, it's following my eyes and staying locked onto my face. This is important when filming this type of talking head YouTube video because you might move, it might catch something in the background. You want to be in focus as much as possible. So to do that, the best way to do it when you're shooting video is to change your camera's autofocus settings to continuous. Continuous means that it's going to lock onto you, but if you move, it'll adjust the focus based on where you're moving. So set it to continuous autofocus, and if you have an eye autofocus setting, I would enable that as well if you're filming these types of videos where your head's in the frame so the camera follows you around as you're filming. So that is it for video settings. Now the last setting you're going to want to set up has to do with audio. So if you're filming YouTube videos and you want to do things right, you might want to invest in a small microphone, either like a cheap lapel mic like the one I just showed you. Really affordable. You can clip it to your shirt, picks up great audio, much better than what your camera can. Or like a shotgun mic, basically a mic that sits on the camera and points at you. Both can be had for pretty reasonable prices. I'll put some links into the description. But the one setting you want to tweak, regardless of which type of mic you're using, is your external microphone setting. So basically, you want to go into your camera settings, find your audio settings, find where your microphone level adjustments are, and for your external settings, just set that all the way down. It should be like -20 or -30 decibels. Don't worry, it's not gonna cut out all your audio. Basically, the reason you do that is these cameras have very sensitive amplifiers, or maybe not that they're sensitive, maybe they're just cheap. So when you use a powerful external mic, you're gonna hear a whole bunch of background noise. So you crank down the decibels of your external mic settings. That way when you record, you're just picking up what you wanna pick up. And then when you edit the video, you can kind of raise the volume and everything sounds great. It's probably way more technical than that, but just do it, thank me later. So that's pretty much it. You can get started filming awesome YouTube videos. You can start your YouTube journey with the cheapest camera you can buy in your camera store and a really cheap microphone on Amazon. The last thing you just want to be mindful of is lighting. So for me right now, I'm using 2 Amazon panel lights. They were a couple $100, but don't worry, if you don't want to spend money on lighting, you can just sit in front of a bright window on a really sunny day, or in a bright room with a lot of white walls reflecting light on you. Play around with your house, move your camera around, see where the most flattering lighting is, and film there. You don't need fancy lighting to make great YouTube videos. Like the first 100 videos on my channel, I filmed every day before sunset with the sun setting into my window. I put up my curtains. It was like a nice big white diffuser, and it worked just fine. So yeah, that's how you can get started creating YouTube videos with a cheap camera, with settings that should carry you through a long way of your YouTube journey. Now, the hardest part is next. You have to just start recording, start making videos, and see if this process is for you. So I hope this video was really helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'm really into this stuff. I've learned so much since starting my own YouTube channels, and I'd be happy to help. So thank you so much for watching. Until next time, cheers.